Beneath the northern skies, where the aurora painted rivers of green fire across the frozen heavens, the world of the Vikings came alive in stories whispered by wind and carved into stone with the jagged lines of runes. Their sagas were not merely tales. They were maps to the soul of a people who feared no storm, no ocean, no god. From the longships with their dragon-headed prows cutting through the North Sea to the echo of war horns calling warriors into battle, the Vikings were more than raiders. They were builders of myth, shapers of legend, and keepers of secrets hidden in the runestones scattered across Scandinavia. In the flickering firelight of a mead hall, a skald would stand, his voice booming as he invoked the names of Odin, the All-Father who gave his eye for wisdom, Thor whose hammer Mjolnir crushed giants and shook the skies with thunder, and Loki, the trickster whose cunning birthed chaos and whose laughter often heralded tragedy. These gods were not distant. They walked among mortals in disguise, tested them, punished them, rewarded them. Every rune carved on a piece of bone or wood was a fragment of their divine language, a secret alphabet said to hold the very power of creation itself. The Vikings believed that by inscribing these runes, one could summon protection in battle, call upon love, or even whisper to the dead. They did not merely worship their gods. They lived with them, fought with them, and prepared for Ragnarok, the twilight of the world when the serpent Jormungandr would rise from the sea and the great wolf Fenrir would break his chains, devouring the sun. It was not just in myth that the Vikings found glory. Their presence has seeped into modern culture, rising again through film and television. In series like Vikings, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok became a bridge between the past and the present, drawing millions into the raw poetry of blood and destiny. The Northmen brought a brutal vision of vengeance wrapped in ritual and prophecy, reminding us that Viking life was equal parts violence and spirituality. Even in the Marvel universe, the hammer-wielding Thor has become an immortal icon, though softened by modern humor, still carrying in his name the thunder of ancient Norse belief. Yet behind the glossy screens lies the deeper truth. Those ships, those sagas, those gods, they belong to real men and women who crossed oceans in search of glory, carving out kingdoms in England, Ireland, and even as far as North America long before Columbus. Their legends are not just entertainment but echoes of a time when survival was bound to the favor of gods and the strength of one's sword arm. Picture a chieftain standing on a cliff above the fjords, his cloak whipping in the cold wind, his eyes tracing the stars that guided his ship through endless darkness. He knew the constellations not just as points of light but as symbols of fate. The same stars that watched over him were believed to be windows to Asgard, where Odin sat on his high throne, ravens whispering secrets into his ear. Every voyage began with sacrifice, a prayer to Njord, god of the sea, or to Freya, goddess of fertility and war. Blood spilled on the stones was not cruelty but an offering, a pact with forces beyond comprehension. And when the longships set sail, their oars beating in unison, it was as though the very heartbeat of Midgard echoed across the waves. Their runestones still stand, etched with names of warriors who sought immortality not in life but in memory. They are not silent. When the wind blows across them, it carries whispers of forgotten battles, of feasts, of journeys into lands of ice and fire. Even now, archaeologists uncover buried treasures, ornate swords, silver hoards, bone-carved amulets, that speak of a people who valued beauty as much as power. The Vikings were not merely destroyers, they were storytellers, traders, poets, and visionaries. And though centuries have passed, their world refuses to fade. For in every film, every rune tattoo inked on modern skin, every retelling of their sagas, the spirit of the North rises again, demanding to be remembered, demanding to be feared, demanding to be understood. Their myths were woven like a web across the 9 realms, each story a thread binding gods, giants, men and beasts together in a fragile balance that was always on the verge of breaking. At the heart of all creation stood Yggdrasil, the world tree, its branches stretching into the heavens, its roots coiled deep into realms of ice, fire, and shadow. On its highest branch perched a great eagle whose wings stirred the winds, while at its roots gnawed the dragon in Yggdrasil, forever seeking to bring the tree down. Between them scurried Ratatoskr, the sly squirrel, carrying insults from eagle to dragon, fanning the eternal feud between sky and underworld. To the Vikings, Yggdrasil was not just a tree, it was the very axis of existence, the cosmic order upon which everything depended. From Asgard, the gods reigned in power and pride. Odin, the Allfather, hung himself for 9 nights upon Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, to seize the knowledge of the runes from the abyss. This sacrifice was not for vanity but for wisdom, a reminder that even kings must suffer to gain truth. From then on, the runes carried magic, words not just written but alive, binding the will of gods and mortals alike. Thor, son of Odin, was the defender of mankind. His hammer Mjolnir was not only a weapon but a holy symbol, used to bless marriages, protect homes, and sanctify oaths. Each strike of his hammer echoed like thunder across Midgard, a reminder that giants still lurked in the frozen wastes, waiting to invade. Yet Thor was not invincible. In the prophecy of Ragnarok, it was written that he would slay the world serpent Jormungandr, only to stagger 9 steps and fall dead from its venom. Loki, the trickster, was both beloved and despised, a figure of chaos who delighted in breaking the order the gods worked so hard to maintain. He fathered monsters, Fenrir the wolf, destined to devour Odin, Hel, the queen of the underworld, and Jormungandr, whose coils encircled the earth. Though he was kin to the gods, his betrayal at the death of Baldur, the shining god of purity, sealed his fate. Bound in chains beneath the earth, venom dripping on his face, Loki waits for the day when his bonds will shatter, and he will march against Asgard at the end of all things. The stories did not belong only to the gods. Heroes like Sigurd, who slew the dragon Fafnir and tasted its blood to understand the speech of birds, carried the same fire in their veins. Shieldmaidens, fierce women who fought alongside men, strode into battle with blades gleaming and hair streaming, their names etched into memory as proof that destiny bowed to no one. Skalds sang of voyages across storm-black seas, where the Valkyries would appear on winged steeds, choosing which warriors would fall and which would rise to Valhalla. Valhalla itself was more than a hall. It was a promise. To fall in battle was not defeat but triumph. A ticket to Odin's great hall where endless feasting awaited and every wound healed with the dawn. There the chosen warriors, the Einherjar, trained daily, clashing in combat until the ground shook, only to rise again, laughing, their cups of mead overflowing. They prepared for the last battle, Ragnarok, when the sky would split, the sun would darken, and the gods would march with their mortal companions against the tide of fire and shadow. The Vikings did not fear this end. They embraced it. For in their myths, doom was inevitable. The gods themselves were not immortal, their deaths foretold, their victories fleeting. What mattered was not the avoidance of fate but the courage to face it head-on. Sword in hand, eyes blazing, heart unyielding. To live bravely was to defy the void, even if the void would one day consume all. So their stories live on, not just as relics of the past but as living echoes. Every rune etched in stone, every saga preserved on vellum, every whisper of the skalds reminds us that myth was not escape. It was truth wrapped in fire and shadow. For the Vikings, gods and men walked the same path, and both would one day meet their end at Ragnarok. But in that final clash lay the glory they sought, the spark that kept their people unbroken, the heartbeat of the North itself. They were not only creatures of myth but flesh and blood. Men and women forged in a world of harsh winters, roaring seas, and endless hunger for survival. Viking life was a constant balance between the farmstead and the battlefield, between carving wood into tools and carving steel into enemies. In their villages, long houses stretched like the ribs of whales, their walls blackened with smoke, their roofs covered with turf. Inside, families gathered around fire pits, telling stories while the smell of roasted meat and fermenting mead filled the air. Children were taught early the skills of survival. Boys learned to wield axes as soon as they could lift them, while girls learned the craft of weaving, healing, and often, how to wield a blade themselves if danger came. Yet the same hands that plowed the frozen soil of Scandinavia were the hands that grasped the oars of sleek longships, crafted to glide across rivers and seas alike. These ships were their lifeblood, their wings of conquest. With shallow hulls and dragon-headed prows, they could strike from the ocean like a storm, slip into rivers unseen, and vanish before an army could gather. To those who lived in the monasteries and villages of England, Ireland, or France, the sight of a longship on the horizon was a vision of terror. Death had come by water, silent until the roar of shields and steel broke the dawn. The monks who wrote the chronicles of the time described these raids as if demons had spilled from the sea. And in truth, the Vikings cultivated that image. Fear was a weapon as sharp as any sword. But these raids were not mindless slaughter. They were driven by necessity and ambition. Scandinavian lands were rocky, their fields small, their winters brutal. To feed their clans and honor their gods, they sought wealth abroad: silver, grain, cattle, and slaves. The monasteries of Lindisfarne and Iona, unguarded sanctuaries of treasure, fell to Viking fire and steel, their holy books scattered, their bells melted into ingots of silver. In Paris, their fleets blocked the Seine, demanding ransom in gold to spare the city. In Ireland, they carved out kingdoms, building fortified towns like Dublin that would later grow into great cities. Every raid was also a test of courage, a step on the path to Valhalla. A warrior who died with a sword in hand was celebrated. A man who faltered was shamed. Their shield walls clashed like thunder, the round wooden shields locked tight, axes biting through mail, spears darting between cracks. Blood soaked the ground, and yet for the Vikings this was more than survival. It was identity. Their songs were filled with the names of those who fell bravely. Their sagas immortalized the heroes who sailed farther, fought harder, and returned richer than any before. Not all Viking journeys ended in violence. Many turned to trade, carrying furs, amber, and iron southward, returning with silks, spices, and silver coins stamped with Arabic script. They reached as far as Byzantium, where the Varangian Guard, an elite force of Norse mercenaries, became the personal protectors of the Byzantine emperors. Others ventured west to Iceland, Greenland, and even the shores of North America, where Leif Erikson set foot centuries before Columbus. Their hunger for discovery rivaled their thirst for battle, and their courage pushed them into lands no one else dared reach. Still, their reputation as raiders endured, burned into the memories of Europe. To hear the thunder of oars, to see the dragons on the prows, was to know that death was coming fast, unstoppable, merciless. And yet, behind the fear there was respect. The Vikings were not shadows, they were men and women who had mastered the sea, who had turned survival into legend, who had written their destiny not in ink but in fire and blood. In their world, life was short, and death was always near. That was why they lived with such ferocity, why they carved their names into stone, why they raised runestones to the fallen, why they sang louder, fought harder, and feared nothing. To be Viking was to embrace the storm, to let the world know that your time had come, and to ensure that even when your bones turned to dust, your name would echo in the sagas forever. Then there was the heart of their spirit, the culture that breathed beneath the steel and salt, the soul of the North that endured even when their raids became only whispers in foreign chronicles. Their festivals, wild with fire and feasting, honored gods and ancestors alike. Blot, the sacred sacrifice, was offered with solemn chants and blood spilled upon stones, a gift to the divine in exchange for good harvests and safe journeys. Mead horns clinked together as skalds recited sagas, weaving the deeds of heroes into immortal verse. These poets were more than entertainers, they were the keepers of memory, the ones who turned fleeting lives into eternal legend. Without the skalds, Ragnar would have been only a man. With them, he became the dragon slayer, the sea king, the father of conquerors. Their laws were as fierce as their battles, yet balanced with order. At the Thing, the great assembly, free men gathered to speak, to argue, to settle disputes with words as sharp as blades. Justice was not a king's decree but a communal voice, a living rhythm of law and honor. Outlaws who broke the codes were stripped of protection, forced to wander the wilderness with death at their heels. And yet even in exile, sagas tell of men who carved kingdoms from nothing, proving that fate favored those with unshakable will. Their crafts spoke of beauty hidden within brutality, jewelry of silver and gold, twisted into shapes of dragons and wolves, gleamed upon warriors and maidens. Ships were carved with intricate designs, their prows both weapons of fear and works of art. Their burial mounds filled with swords, shields, horses, and even ships, revealed a belief that death was not the end but a voyage into another world. To be buried with your longship was to sail forever into eternity. And though the gods loomed large, there was always the shadow of Ragnarok on the horizon. The Vikings knew their world was doomed to end. They knew that Odin would fall to Fenrir, that Thor would die fighting the serpent, that flames would consume the earth. Yet they did not despair. They found strength in this inevitability. If all things must end, then let them end with courage, with fire in the heart, with songs that would be sung until the last breath of the world. This is why their spirit lingers. It is not only in the sagas written on vellum or the ruins of longhouses scattered across the fjords. It is in the modern blood, in the fascination with their myths, in films that retell their struggles, in tattoos of runes inked on skin, in reenactments where longships glide once more across rivers. The Viking spirit survives because it was never only about conquest or death. It was about the defiance of fate, the will to carve one's story against the cold silence of time. Their echoes are in us still, every time we speak of courage, of destiny, of the storm that cannot be avoided but must be met head-on. The gods may have fallen, the longships may rest beneath earth and sea, but the saga of the North does not fade. It rises with every retelling, reminding us that to be Viking was to live as if tomorrow was already burning, and today was the only chance to leave a mark upon the world. And so the saga draws to its end, not in silence but in the echo of waves against the hull of a ship that has long since rotted beneath the sea. The Vikings lived in a world where every breath was a battle, where the gods themselves were destined to fall, where life was measured not by its length but by the strength of one's deeds. They farmed their stubborn land, they carved their runes into stone, they sailed beyond the edges of known maps, and they left behind more than fear. They left stories strong enough to outlast centuries. Their raids shook kingdoms, their trade built bridges, their myths gave meaning to chaos, and their courage carved legends so deep they still shine through the fog of time. From Odin's sacrifice on Yggdrasil to Thor's thunder across the skies, from the flames of Ragnarok to the halls of Valhalla, their myths gave them the strength to face a brutal world without bending. From the longships slicing through mist to the halls of kings who trembled at their arrival, their history reshaped continents. And though the sagas of men like Ragnar, Leif, and Harald have become tangled with myth, that is how the Vikings wished it to be. For they believed that the greatest victory was not to live forever, but to be remembered forever. Today their shadows linger in our films, in our books, in our symbols. We see their gods reborn in modern mythologies, their runes inked onto skin as emblems of resilience, their longships recreated in festivals where fire and song recall the heartbeat of the North. And perhaps this is their truest immortality, not in blood spilled long ago, but in the way their spirit still speaks to us, reminding us to live boldly, to face fate with unshaken will, and to carve our names into the world before the storm comes. The saga's close, the fires of the mead hall die down, the skald's voice fades into the night. Yet the story of the Vikings does not vanish, it sails on, carried like a flame through centuries, eternal as the northern stars that once guided them across dark seas. Their time has passed, but their spirit endures, and so long as men and women dare to defy the silence of death with courage, the Vikings will never truly be gone.